The arrival. It was a bitter, gray morning as the four women huddled together, shivering beneath threadbare coats. Snowflakes, soft as whispered promises, danced in the air but landed cold and cruel against the frozen ground. The barracks loomed in front of them, intimidating and unforgiving, but inside there was warmth, at least the kind that came from bodies pressed close in a desperate attempt to hold on to hope. Meg, the eldest, was the first to speak. "We must hold on to each other," she whispered, her voice calm but determined. She tried to be brave, tried to be the mother figure since their arrival, but her dark eyes betrayed her fears. Beside her, Joe's hands clenched into fists. Her usually wild spirit felt caged, but the fire in her eyes remained, stubborn and unyielding. "I won't let them break us," she vowed, more to herself than anyone else. Joe's heart burned with a fierce need to resist, to fight the unjust world that had torn them from their family. Beth, quiet and frail, clung to her sisters. Her fingers, thin and pale, trembled as they sought comfort in Meg's sturdy frame. Beth's kind eyes were the gentlest among them, but there was a sadness there, a resignation that the others tried to pretend didn't exist. Yet it was Beth who first noticed the midwife. "Anna," she murmured softly, her voice like a small bell ringing in the darkness. Anna was known among the women, a brave figure who moved like a ghost among the suffering, bringing what little help she could to those in need. She was rumored to be a midwife, but here she was much more. To some, she was a healer, to others, a symbol of hope. Amy, the youngest, her cheeks flushed with anger, had been crying silently. "Why do they hate us so?" she asked, her voice both naive and sharp. Amy's beauty had always been her pride, but here it felt like a curse, drawing unwanted attention that made Meg pull her closer protectively. Anna's arrival brought a momentary relief, a small promise of humanity amidst the cruelty of the camp. She was tall, with dark hair tied back, and a look in her eyes that was equal parts compassion and determination. She approached them with the ease of someone used to chaos. "Are you sisters?" Anna asked, her voice soft but commanding. Joe, always quick to speak, nodded. "We are. And we'll do whatever we can to survive together." Anna's expression softened. "I know what it means to hold on to family," she said. "But it won't be easy here. You must stay strong, especially for each other." Her words were simple, but the weight of them was immense. "Do you really help women give birth here?" Beth asked, her voice tinged with awe. Anna's gaze turned somber. "Yes, when I can. Babies aren't born into kindness here, but they are born into hope." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying a weariness that seemed older than her years. Meg, ever the pragmatic one, stepped forward. "What can we do to help? We don't have much, but we're willing to work." Anna looked at the sisters, her eyes lingering on each one. "Your hearts are your greatest tools," she said quietly, "and that may be the only weapon we have left." It was a small beginning, a tiny flicker of warmth in a place so cold. The sisters, despite the horrors that awaited them, found a sliver of purpose in the woman who promised them not just survival, but a reason to keep surviving. The shadows of sisterhood. The days in Auschwitz were a blur of bitter cold and endless work, where time lost meaning and survival was measured by breaths, not hours. Each morning the four sisters were forced into labor, their bodies aching from hunger and exhaustion. Yet even amidst this bleak routine, the bond between them grew stronger, as if adversity itself were the thread sewing their hearts together. It was Beth who struggled the most. Her body, already delicate before the camp, was weakening further. The others tried to shield her from the harshest tasks, but there was little they could do to protect her from the biting wind or the grueling hunger. Her smile, once so sweet, now seemed frail, a ghost of the joy she had once brought to their home. Joe, frustrated by her own helplessness, approached Anna during the rare moments they had between labor shifts. "Beth's not well," she said bluntly, her voice tinged with desperation. "She can't go on like this much longer. Is there anything at all, that can be done?" Anna's eyes, weary yet resolute, met Joe's with understanding. "I wish I had more to offer," she said. "But the camp's medicine is scarce, and meant only for the strongest. I'll see what I can find, a piece of bread perhaps, or something to warm her bones." Joe nodded, her fierce gratitude shining through her exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "We can't lose her." Meanwhile, Meg had taken on the role of caretaker, watching over the others as if they were still back in their modest living room, sitting by a cozy fire. She would save bits of her ration for Beth and mend their tattered clothing as best she could, her needle pricking her fingers until they bled. Meg's love was practical, small acts of kindness that kept them all from falling apart completely. Amy, on the other hand, tried to keep a spark of normalcy alive. "Remember how we used to paint?" she asked one night, huddled with her sisters in the dark barracks. "The sunsets back home were so much brighter than these dull skies. I wish I could paint them again, just once." She mimicked the motions of painting with her fingers, her hands drawing invisible strokes in the air. Jo, despite the suffocating reality of their surroundings, found herself smiling. "Someday, Amy," she promised, "we'll paint sunsets again, real sunsets, not just memories." Beth's cough broke the silence then, a rattling sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. Meg immediately wrapped her arm around her sister's shoulders, rubbing her back gently. "Shh, Beth," she soothed. "Try to rest. We're here, right beside you." That night, Anna returned with a small piece of bread wrapped in a tattered cloth. It was hardly enough, but it was something, a gesture that spoke of defiance against the darkness. She pressed it into Meg's hand. "For Beth," she whispered. "Keep her warm if you can." Meg nodded, tears threatening to spill as she accepted the precious gift. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "We won't forget this." Anna's eyes softened. "You don't owe me thanks," she replied quietly. "Just promise me you'll hold on, for her and for each other. It's the only way any of us will make it through." The sisters shared the bread among themselves, each taking only a small bite to save the rest for Beth. As they ate in silence, a quiet strength seemed to settle over them. The darkness outside was vast, but within their small circle there was a warmth that could not be extinguished. Even here, in the heart of cruelty, the March sisters held on to something more powerful than fear. They held on to each other, and in that simple act of love, they defied the world that sought to break them. The fire inside, another dawn arrived, cruel and indifferent. The sisters were awakened by harsh shouts and the clang of metal doors. Jo, always the quickest to rise, nudged the others. "Up now," she urged, her voice low but urgent. She sounded like a soldier, and in a way she was, one fighting a war of spirit rather than weapons. Amy, her cheeks smudged with grime, blinked groggily. "Why can't they give us just one more moment of peace?" she mumbled, her voice still carrying the remnants of the dream she had been lost in. She pulled her thin blanket closer, as if trying to keep the warmth of sleep a little longer. Meg, already on her feet, helped Beth stand. "Lean on me," she insisted, her voice steady. "We'll get through today, just as we did yesterday." Beth managed a weak smile, though her eyes were heavy with fatigue. "I'm trying," she whispered. "It's just so hard." Her words were raw, an admission of the struggle that had no end in sight. Anna arrived at their barracks just before they were herded to the labor grounds. Her face was stern, but there was a flicker of warmth in her gaze as she glanced at the sisters. "Today is different," she announced quietly. "There's a new group arriving, women and children." Meg's brow furrowed. "Children? Here?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and sadness. Anna nodded. "Yes, and it's our duty to protect them however we can." She looked directly at Jo. "You have a strong spirit, Jo, the kind of strength that frightens the guards. I need you to help manage the newcomers, make them feel less afraid. Can you do that?" Jo straightened her back, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time since their arrival. "Of course," she said firmly. "I can do that." Amy, ever the dreamer, whispered to Meg as they trudged toward the gates. "Imagine if we could take them all home," she said wistfully. "A warm fire, hot soup, and stories before bed." Meg squeezed Amy's hand gently. "Yes, we'd make it lovely for them," she agreed, her voice tinged with a sadness she couldn't quite hide. "But for now, we'll have to settle for being kind." When the newcomers arrived, chaos ensued. Women staggered forward, holding tightly to children who clung to them like lifelines. Some cried openly, while others were too exhausted to shed tears. It was a scene of utter despair, yet it was also one of resilience, a testament to the will to survive, even in the darkest of places. Jo found herself kneeling beside a young boy who had fallen to his knees, his small face streaked with dirt and fear. "Hey there," she said softly, reaching out a hand. "It's okay. I'm Jo, and I'm going to help you." The boy looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "Will they hurt us?" he asked, his voice so small that Jo felt her heart crack. She shook her head fiercely. Not if I can help it, she promised. I'll stay right here with you. Beth, watching from a distance, felt a strange sense of calm settle over her as she witnessed Jo's kindness. It was as if Jo's fiery spirit was lighting a path through the darkness, offering a glimpse of hope that seemed almost impossible to grasp. Anna, moving among the women, found Meg trying to soothe a crying baby whose mother was too weak to hold her. You have a gift, Anna told Meg quietly. Your kindness is rare here. Meg managed a small, sad smile. I only wish I could do more, she admitted. I feel so helpless. Anna nodded, her expression softening. We all feel that way, she said. But even the smallest kindness can be a rebellion here. Amy, who had been helping a group of young girls find shelter, suddenly spoke up. What if we taught them to draw in the dirt, she suggested, her eyes bright with a sudden inspiration. It's not much, but it's something, a bit of beauty in all this ugliness. Anna's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. That's a wonderful idea, she agreed. And perhaps it will remind them, and all of us, that life goes on, even here. That day, in a place designed to strip away hope, the sisters found a small victory. The children laughed, the women found brief moments of relief, and even the guards seemed momentarily confused by the sight of smiles. Jo watched her sisters, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. They had lost so much, yet they had not lost themselves. In this cruel world, they had managed to keep alive the fire of sisterhood, a fire that could not be extinguished, not even by the darkest night. A fragile refuge night had fallen once more, heavy and cold. The camp was shrouded in a darkness that felt endless, like a suffocating blanket of fear. The sisters gathered in a corner of their barracks, forming a circle with their bodies, seeking warmth and a sense of safety. It was a meager comfort, but one they clung to fiercely. Beth, lying on a thin straw mat, shivered under the tattered blanket Meg had wrapped around her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle. It's so cold, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Meg knelt beside her, rubbing Beth's arms gently. Hold on, Beth, she urged, her tone as soft as the lullabies she used to sing back home. We're right here. Amy, sitting close by, tried to distract Beth from the pain. Do you remember the apple orchard, Beth? She asked suddenly, her voice a mixture of longing and hope. The one by the river where we'd go to play? Beth closed her eyes, her lips forming a small smile. I remember, she murmured. The trees were always so full, and the apples were the sweetest in late summer. Jo, her face hidden in the shadows, watched the exchange silently. Her hands were balled into fists, and her jaw was set tight. We'll get out of here, she vowed quietly, as if to herself as much as to her sisters. I don't know how, but we will. The door creaked open then, and Anna slipped inside. Her movements were swift and quiet, practiced from months of stealth and caution. She carried a small bundle under her coat, bread, a thin slice of cheese, and a piece of ragged cloth that smelled faintly of herbs. I brought this, Anna said, handing the bundle to Meg. It's not much, but it will help. Meg's eyes welled up with tears. Thank you, she whispered, the gratitude in her voice raw and sincere. You've done so much for us already. Anna knelt beside Beth, gently pressing the herbal cloth against her forehead. It's lavender, she explained. It's calming, at least for a while. Beth opened her eyes and looked up at Anna with a mixture of awe and gratitude. You're like an angel, she said, her voice weak but full of wonder. Anna's face softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke of all the things she couldn't change. I'm just someone who refuses to let the darkness win, she replied quietly. Jo, unable to bear the sight of Beth's suffering, rose to her feet suddenly. Isn't there anything more we can do? She demanded, her voice filled with the same stubborn defiance that had gotten her into trouble countless times before. Anna met Jo's gaze, her own eyes filled with both exhaustion and resolve. You're doing it already, she said. You're staying alive, keeping each other warm. It may not seem like much, but here, it's everything. Amy, sensing Jo's frustration, reached out and touched her arm gently. Jo, you're helping just by being here, she said softly. Beth knows it. We all do. Jo's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the situation bearing down on her. I just want to do more, she admitted, her voice raw with the pain of her helplessness. Anna stood then, her eyes sweeping over the four sisters. We all want to do more, she said quietly. But sometimes the greatest act of defiance is simply surviving. And that's what we must do, survive for each other. There was a moment of silence as the words sank in. Then, slowly, the sisters nodded, each finding a small spark of strength in Anna's presence. Before she left, Anna turned to Meg. "Watch over her closely tonight," she said, her voice low. "Beth's fever is high, and she needs rest." Meg nodded, determination etched on her face. "I will," she promised. "We'll make it through the night, somehow." As Anna slipped back into the shadows, the sisters settled down again, their bodies forming a protective cocoon around Beth. Amy began to hum a lullaby, one from their childhood, when the world was a safer, kinder place. Her voice was soft, but the melody was enough to bring a flicker of warmth to the cold barracks. Beth's breathing slowed, and her eyes closed once more. "Sing it again," she whispered. And so they did, the sisters' voices blending together in a fragile harmony. The sound was faint, barely audible above the howling wind, but it was a song of resistance, of love that refused to yield. In the darkness of Auschwitz, the March sisters found a refuge in each other, however small. And in that moment, they were not prisoners, they were family, bound by a love that could not be broken. Whispers of hope. Another bleak morning rose over the camp, with a thin mist hanging in the air like the ghost of dreams long lost. As the sisters prepared for another grueling day, there was a heaviness between them, a silence filled with the weight of too many worries. Jo was the first to break it, her voice edged with determination. "We must find a way to lift Beth's spirits," she insisted, her eyes burning with the same defiant spark that had always defined her. "If we lose hope, we lose everything." Meg, her face lined with fatigue, nodded slowly. "She's getting weaker," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But she's still with us, Jo. We have to hold on to that." Amy, always eager to bring light into the darkness, clapped her hands suddenly. "I have an idea," she announced, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes that was so reminiscent of home. "Let's tell stories tonight, like we used to. Stories of faraway lands and brave adventures, something to remind Beth of who we are." Jo's lips curved into a reluctant smile. "That's not a bad idea," she agreed. "It's the kind of rebellion we can afford." Later that evening, after the day's labor had drained the last of their energy, the sisters gathered around Beth. The air was icy, but their small circle radiated a faint warmth. Amy, eager to begin, cleared her throat dramatically. "Once upon a time," she started, her voice hushed yet full of life, "there were 4 sisters who lived in a small, warm cottage surrounded by fields of wildflowers." Beth's eyes fluttered open, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That sounds like home," she whispered, her voice thin but touched with nostalgia. Amy nodded enthusiastically. "It is home," she agreed. And in this story the sisters were fearless adventurers, each one with a special talent. The eldest, Meg, was wise and nurturing, always caring for the others with a kind heart. Meg blushed at the unexpected praise but couldn't help but smile. "Go on," she encouraged, eager to hear more. Amy continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Then there was Jo, the fierce and bold one, who led them on daring quests and always found a way to make them laugh, even when things seemed dark." Jo's face softened, and she let out a quiet laugh. "I'd have led them to trouble, most likely," she teased. But there was pride in her voice. "And Beth," Amy went on, turning to the pale figure beside her, "was the gentle one, so kind that even the animals in the forest would follow her, just to be near her warmth." Beth's smile grew, and for a moment her eyes shone with the same light they once had. "That's a lovely story, Amy," she said. "I wish I could be as brave as the Beth in it." "You are," Jo insisted, her voice firm. "You're braver than any of us." Anna appeared then, her footsteps quiet but purposeful. She listened for a moment, her expression softening as she realized what the sisters were doing. "Storytelling," she said quietly. "It's one of the oldest forms of hope." Jo looked up, surprised. "Do you have a story, Anna?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Anna hesitated, as if unsure whether to let the past touch the present, but then with a faint smile, she began. "Once there was a woman who brought life into the world. She was called a midwife, and her hands were strong from holding new life in them. One day she found herself in a place where life seemed impossible, but she kept going, because each birth, each cry was a victory." Meg's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "That's you," she realized. You're the midwife in the story. Anna nodded slowly. Yes, it is my story, she admitted, and it's also the story of survival, of refusing to let this place steal what makes us human. Joe's heart ached at the truth in Anna's words. We need to believe in those victories, don't we? She asked softly. Anna's gaze was steady. Yes, she said simply, because without hope, we're lost. As the sisters settled down to sleep that night, they felt a shift, an invisible but powerful change. The stories had been a small thing, a brief escape, but they were enough to remind them of who they were. They were not just prisoners. They were storytellers, dreamers, sisters bound by love and defiance. Beth's breathing was still labored, her body fragile. But as she drifted into sleep, her face was peaceful, touched by the warmth of the stories she had heard. And for the first time in a long while, the sisters closed their eyes not with dread, but with a spark of hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was theirs. The secret exchange dawn broke with the same merciless chill, but this time there was a new tension in the air. The camp seemed restless, as if it sensed the whispers of something unexpected. The sisters gathered close, wrapping their threadbare coats tighter around themselves. Beth was too weak to rise that morning. Her breaths were slow and ragged, her body thin and frail. Meg stayed by her side, her face etched with worry. Rest today, Beth, she urged gently. I'll manage for both of us. Amy, trying to mask her fear with cheerfulness, reached out to touch Beth's hand. We'll bring you back something special, she promised with a hopeful smile, though what special meant in this place was anyone's guess. Joe, her face set with determination, spoke in a low voice as they prepared to leave. Anna mentioned something last night, she said quietly. There might be a chance to get more food, a secret exchange. Meg looked skeptical, her brow furrowing. Isn't that dangerous? Joe nodded. Everything here is dangerous, but I'm going to try. Just be careful, Meg whispered, worry lacing her words. We can't afford to lose you. As the sisters filed out for another day of forced labor, Joe's eyes scanned the bleak landscape, searching for Anna. It didn't take long. Anna had a way of standing out even when she was trying to blend in, her face a mix of sternness and compassion. Joe approached her quickly. You mentioned an exchange, she said, keeping her voice low. What do we need to do? Anna's gaze was sharp but filled with a grim sort of hope. There's a woman in the kitchens, an older one who has managed to keep a small stash of bread and dried potatoes. She's willing to share, but she needs help in return. Joe's curiosity was piqued. What kind of help? Anna's voice grew even quieter. She's hiding a child, a young girl who came in with the latest transport. She's terrified the guards will find her, so she's been keeping her in the back, near the supplies. Joe's heart tightened. And you need us to distract the guards? Anna nodded. Yes, if you can keep them occupied, I'll try to get the food to you. The plan was risky, but Joe's resolve was unshakable. We'll do it, she said firmly. That afternoon, the sisters did as Anna asked. Amy, with her natural charm, approached one of the guards with innocent questions about camp rules, her wide eyes blinking up at him as if she were genuinely interested. Meg, meanwhile, pretended to trip over a loose cobblestone, drawing attention to herself as she picked up the pieces of her dignity with exaggerated slowness. Joe, for her part, lingered near the kitchen, creating a small disturbance by accidentally dropping a pile of empty sacks. The guards were momentarily distracted, barking orders for her to move faster. Anna seized the opportunity. She slipped into the back of the kitchen, moving quickly to the hidden stash. She pulled out 2 small loaves of bread and a handful of dried potatoes, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of the child, no older than 6, with wide, fearful eyes. Anna knelt beside her, her voice gentle. Stay quiet, little one, she urged softly. We'll keep you safe. The child nodded silently, her tiny body shaking with both cold and fear. Anna hurried back, clutching the precious food tightly under her coat. When she reached the sisters, she handed the goods to Joe, who quickly hid them in her own jacket. Thank you, Joe said, her voice thick with emotion. This will make a difference. Anna's eyes softened. You did well, she said, but be careful. There are always eyes watching. That night, in the darkness of the barracks, the sisters gathered around Beth once more. Meg broke the bread into small pieces, her hands shaking slightly. Eat slowly, Beth, she urged. This will help. Beth's eyes were wide with gratitude as she took the bread. "Where did you get this?" she asked between bites, her voice full of wonder. "Let's just say we had a bit of luck," Jo replied, her tone light, though her heart was heavy with the risks they'd taken. Amy, trying to brighten the moment, chimed in. "See, Beth, we told you we'd bring you something special." For the first time in days, Beth managed a small laugh, a weak, breathless sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "It's perfect," she said simply. "Thank you." As they ate, there was a feeling among them that was almost foreign, a sense of victory. It was a small one, to be sure, but in a place designed to strip away all hope, it was enough to make them feel like they had won a battle, however fleeting. And as the sisters settled down to sleep, Jo felt a fierce sense of pride. They were surviving, defying the darkness one small act of rebellion at a time. It was not much, but it was enough to kindle the fire inside them, a fire that refused to die. The spark of defiance. The next morning arrived with the familiar, brutal chill, but there was a different kind of energy among the sisters. The stolen food had given them more than just sustenance. It had rekindled something deeper, a small but vital spark of defiance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to bring a faint light into their hollowed eyes. As they lined up for roll call, Jo leaned close to Meg. "Today, we need to find a way to get more," she whispered urgently. "Beth's stronger, but she needs more food to keep getting better." Meg glanced at Jo, concern written across her face. "We can't keep taking risks like that," she warned softly. "One mistake, and it's over." Jo's jaw set in the familiar, stubborn line. "I know the risks, but we can't just sit by and watch Beth fade away. If there's a chance, we have to take it." Before Meg could reply, a guard's voice cut through the crowd, shouting orders for the workers to be separated into different groups. The sisters were divided, with Jo and Amy sent to the kitchens, and Meg kept back with Beth in the infirmary. Jo's heart tightened at the separation, but she steeled herself. "This is another chance," she told herself. "We have to make it count." Inside the kitchens, the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning food and sweat. Women moved quickly, stirring pots of thin soup and scrubbing grimy floors. Jo caught sight of Anna moving with her usual speed and purpose, her eyes alert despite her exhaustion. Anna noticed Jo almost immediately. "You again," she whispered, her voice a mix of surprise and something like admiration. "Did you come back for more trouble?" Jo's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I came back for more bread," she replied. "Beth's doing better, but she needs more." Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful. "There's something else too," she added quietly. "A rumor about an inspection coming soon. We'll have to be even more careful." Jo's heart sank at the news. Inspections often meant more than just a review of supplies. They brought sudden violence, random punishments, and sometimes the disappearance of prisoners. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Not long," Anna replied. "But there's something we can do. There's a hidden storage room at the back of the kitchen behind the sacks of flour. If we're quick, we can take some extra supplies before they search the place." Jo's eyes lit up with determination. "Then let's do it." Amy, who had been listening from nearby, stepped forward. "I'll help too," she offered eagerly. "I can keep watch." Anna glanced at Amy, her expression softening slightly. "You're brave," she said. "But be careful. One wrong move." Amy nodded, her face set. "I know, but it's worth it." The plan was simple but risky. Anna and Jo would slip into the storage room while Amy kept an eye out for the guards. If anyone approached, Amy would signal them by knocking a wooden spoon against a metal pan, a sound common enough not to arouse suspicion. Inside the storage room, Anna and Jo worked quickly, filling the pockets of their thin coats with bread rolls, dried vegetables, and even a small bag of salt, a rare and precious find. Jo's heart pounded with a mix of fear and adrenaline, her hands moving faster than she thought possible. Just as they were about to leave, the sound of the spoon hitting metal echoed from the doorway. Anna's eyes flashed with urgency. "Guards," she hissed. "We have to move now." Jo's mind raced. "Hide behind the sacks," she suggested. "If we stay silent, maybe they'll leave." They crouched low, their bodies pressed against the cold, dusty floor. The sound of heavy boots grew louder, followed by muffled voices. Jo's heart hammered in her chest, and she squeezed her eyes shut, praying they wouldn't be discovered. The guards lingered near the door, their voices harsh and impatient. "Nothing here," one of them grunted. Let's move on. Joe's breath released slowly as the footsteps receded. She turned to Anna, relief and disbelief in her eyes. We did it, she whispered. Anna's expression was serious, but there was a faint hint of a smile. For now, she agreed. Let's not get caught celebrating. They slipped back out to where Amy waited, her face flushed with the success of their mission. Did you get it? She asked eagerly. Joe nodded, her coat heavier with the stolen food. We did, she confirmed. And we're getting better at this. The sisters reunited that night, gathered once again around Beth. The hidden food was distributed carefully, each bite a victory against the hunger that had plagued them for so long. Meg's eyes shone with gratitude. You did it, she said to Joe and Amy. You really did it. Beth's voice was faint but touched with warmth. You're all so brave, she murmured. I don't know how you do it. Joe's face softened, and she reached out to touch Beth's hand. We do it because of you, Beth, she said simply. You give us something to fight for. As the sisters settled down to sleep, the stolen bread and dried vegetables shared among them, there was a feeling of triumph in the air. It was a small rebellion, a brief moment of success, but it was enough to remind them of their strength. For in this place where every breath felt borrowed, the March sisters had learned that defiance was not just about survival. It was about keeping the fire of hope alive, no matter how dim it might seem. Unbreakable threads. The days had become a slow crawl, blending into each other with the same cruel monotony. Yet, within the barracks, a sense of quiet resistance persisted among the sisters. Beth's condition had improved, if only slightly, and that alone felt like a small victory, one that each of the sisters clung to with the desperation of drowning souls. One afternoon, while Joe was assigned to work near the camp's perimeter, she noticed a small group of prisoners whispering urgently. Her curiosity piqued. She crept closer, her ears straining to catch their words. A chance to get messages out, one of the women was saying, her voice barely more than a whisper. We found a way to communicate with the outside. Joe's heart skipped a beat. She leaned in further, determined to hear more. How? She asked suddenly, unable to contain herself. The woman, startled, looked up at Joe, her eyes wary. Who are you? She demanded, her voice low but sharp. I'm Joe, she replied quickly, her eyes filled with urgency. And if there's a way to send messages out, I want to help. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. There's a group of us, she explained, her voice barely audible. We pass notes through the laundry, scraps of paper hidden among the dirty clothes. It's dangerous, but it's worked a few times. Joe's mind raced. This was the first real chance she'd heard of to reach beyond the barbed wire, to let someone, anyone, know they were still alive. What kind of messages? She asked. Anything that can help, the woman replied. Details of what's happening here, names of prisoners who have been taken, anything we can pass along to resistance groups. Joe's pulse quickened. I have sisters here, she said. If I write to them, could you try to get the message out? The woman nodded again, her expression serious. We'll try, but be quick, and be careful. That night, as they huddled together in the barracks, Joe shared the news with Meg, Amy, and Beth. There's a chance, she said, her voice barely containing her excitement. We could get a message out, to let people know what's happening here, to tell them we're still fighting. Meg's eyes widened, a mix of hope and fear in her expression. But what if we're caught? She asked. You know what they do to anyone suspected of smuggling information. Joe's face hardened. I know, she admitted, but I think it's worth the risk. If someone knows we're still alive, maybe they'll send help. Beth, her voice fragile but filled with determination, spoke up. Do it, she urged. If there's even a small chance that someone will hear us, we have to take it. Amy, always the optimist, added, we could even send word about the children. Maybe someone out there is looking for them. Joe's eyes softened as she looked at her sisters. Then it's decided, she said. I'll write the message tonight. She took a small scrap of fabric from the hem of her coat and used a piece of charcoal to scrawl a few words. We are still here. 4 sisters, many children, need help. It wasn't much, but it was the truth, raw, desperate, and vital. The next morning, as Joe worked near the laundry area, she found the woman from the day before. With a quick glance around to ensure no guards were watching, Joe slipped the fabric scrap into the pile of dirty clothes. It's done, she whispered. The woman nodded, her face a mask of determination. "I'll do my best," she promised. The hours that followed were agonizing. Joe's thoughts were consumed by the possibility of discovery, the weight of the risk she had taken. But as she returned to the barracks that evening, her spirits lifted when she saw her sister's hopeful expressions. "It's in motion," she reported quietly. "Now we wait." The following days passed slowly, with no word or sign that the message had made it out. But the sisters held on to the hope that somewhere, someone might read those desperate words. One evening, Anna appeared at their barracks, her expression unusually tense. "I heard something," she said quietly, her voice laced with urgency. "There's been talk among the guards about intercepted messages. They're planning a search." Joe's heart sank, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We've hidden nothing here," she replied quickly. "And we weren't seen at the laundry." Anna's eyes were sharp as she looked at Joe. "You took a great risk," she said, "but sometimes that's the only way forward." Beth, listening from her mat, spoke up. "If they come, we'll face it together," she said softly. "We won't let them break us." Amy nodded, her face set with determination. "We'll stand strong," she agreed, "no matter what." As the guards swept through the barracks later that night, searching frantically for any signs of smuggled notes, the sisters huddled together, their hands tightly clasped. The guards' rough shouts and angry footsteps were terrifying, but the sisters' defiance was stronger. They found nothing. When the guards finally left, the sisters let out shaky breaths of relief. "We made it," Meg whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and triumph. Joe's eyes burned with fierce pride. "And we'll keep making it," she vowed, "as long as we have each other." Beth's eyes were closed, but her lips curved into a faint smile. "You were right, Joe," she murmured. "There's always a chance." And in that moment, despite the darkness that surrounded them, the sisters felt a new kind of strength, a quiet, unbreakable thread that bound them together, stronger than any prison walls. Fragments of joy. The following days brought an unexpected lull in the guards' aggression. The sisters, despite their constant hunger and fatigue, felt a renewed sense of unity. Beth, though still weak, seemed to have a spark of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there in weeks. On one such morning, Amy's eyes caught something unusual while she was working near the barracks, a tiny flower struggling to grow between the cracks of the concrete. It was barely more than a fragile stem, but it was alive, a flicker of color in a world turned gray. "A flower," Amy breathed, almost in disbelief. She carefully plucked it and hurried to show her sisters. When she reached the barracks, she held up the flower triumphantly. "Look!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with unexpected joy. Joe's eyes widened, and Meg gasped softly. Beth reached out, her thin fingers trembling as she touched the petals gently. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. The sisters took turns holding the tiny bloom, its presence a strange but powerful reminder of resilience. "We'll keep it," Meg declared. "It's a symbol of us. Fragile, but still alive." And so the flower became a cherished possession, tucked carefully into the folds of Meg's coat, hidden from the guards but close to their hearts. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental, a fragment of beauty that defied the cruelty around them. The escape plan. The success of the secret message stirred something bold in Joe. She began to hear whispers of a larger resistance effort brewing within the camp, a dangerous plan that aimed to smuggle a few women out, including children. When Anna caught wind of Joe's interest, she pulled her aside one evening. "This is serious," she warned, her voice urgent. "If you're caught, it's over." Joe's eyes burned with a fierce determination. "I know the risks, Anna, but we can't just sit here waiting to die. If there's even a chance to save Beth or Amy, I'll take it." Anna studied Joe for a long moment, then nodded. "There's a route," she said quietly. "It's risky, but it might work. A few guards can be bribed, and there's a chance to slip out during the next work transfer." Joe's heart raced. "How many can go?" she asked. "Not many," Anna replied. 5, maybe 6. You'd need to choose." The weight of that choice settled heavily on Joe's shoulders. "We'll talk to Meg and Amy," she decided. "But we need to include Beth, too. Even if she's weak, we can't leave her behind." That night, as the sisters gathered in a tight circle, Joe explained the plan. "It's dangerous," she said bluntly, "but it might be our only chance." Meg looked stricken. "Beth can barely stand, Joe," she whispered. "How can she escape?" Beth, despite her frailty, spoke up. If it's a chance for all of us, then I'll try, she insisted. I'd rather die trying to be free than waste away here. Amy's eyes shone with tears. We've come this far, she said. We have to keep going, together. The decision was made. They would try, knowing that the odds were slim, but determined to cling to the hope of freedom. The final night. The night before the planned escape, the sisters gathered with Anna one last time. Anna's face was somber as she explained the details. You'll leave just before dawn, she instructed. Stay close to each other and don't look back. Meg's face was pale but resolute. We're ready, she said. Anna nodded, her eyes lingering on each of the sisters. You've shown more courage than I've seen in most soldiers, she said quietly. But remember, if anything goes wrong, split up. It's harder to catch you if you're not together. Jo's jaw tightened, but she nodded. We understand. Anna took a deep breath. Good, she said. Then let's pray that the dawn brings freedom, not betrayal. The sisters spent their final hours in the barracks holding each other close, whispering words of encouragement. Beth, her voice a soft murmur, tried to reassure her sisters. Whatever happens, she said, we've already won. We've stayed together, and that's something they can't take away. Meg kissed Beth's forehead gently. We'll get you out of here, she promised. We'll all be free. Amy, always the dreamer, tried to make them smile one last time. When we get out, she said, I'm going to paint a real sunset again, one that's full of colors. Jo nodded, her eyes fierce. And I'm going to write our story, she vowed. The world will know what happened here. The attempt. The escape began as planned. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, Anna led the sisters through a series of dark corridors and hidden paths. The camp was eerily quiet, the guards still changing shifts. The sisters moved silently, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and hope. But just as they reached the perimeter, a shout rang out. Stop. Jo spun around, grabbing Beth's hand. Run, she shouted, pushing Meg and Amy forward. Chaos erupted. Guards swarmed toward them, and the sisters were forced to split up. Jo kept Beth close, her grip unyielding, while Meg and Amy darted in another direction. Bullets tore through the air, and Jo's heart raced as she pulled Beth toward a small gap in the fence. Almost there, she urged. Keep moving. But Beth's strength was fading fast. I can't, she gasped, her legs buckling beneath her. Jo's face twisted with desperation. You can, Beth, she insisted. Just a little further. With a final burst of energy, Jo half-carried, half-dragged Beth through the gap. They stumbled into the trees beyond the fence, collapsing into a tangle of branches and leaves. Meg and Amy were not far behind. Panting and exhausted, they fell to their knees beside Jo and Beth, relief flooding their faces. We did it, Jo breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. But before they could celebrate, a bullet cracked through the air. Beth's body jerked suddenly, and she crumpled in Jo's arms. No, Jo screamed, her voice breaking. No, Beth, stay with me. Meg and Amy rushed to her side, their faces white with horror. Beth's eyes fluttered open, a faint smile on her lips. We're free, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jo's tears fell freely. Yes, Beth, she choked out, we're free. Beth's breath slowed, then stopped, her face peaceful at last. Epilogue. A new dawn. The remaining sisters, Jo, Meg, and Amy, made it to safety. Their hearts shattered, but their spirits unbroken. They reached the resistance camp, carrying the weight of Beth's sacrifice with them. As Jo promised, she began to write their story. She described not just the horrors they had faced, but the courage, the love, and the small victories that had kept them alive. She wrote of Beth's gentle strength, of Meg's unwavering care, and of Amy's hopeful dreams. The story spread beyond the camp, reaching those who could help. It became a symbol of defiance, a testament to the unbreakable bond of sisterhood. Years later, as they stood in front of a grave marked with Beth's name, Jo, Meg, and Amy felt the warmth of the sun on their faces. A real golden sun, not just a memory. We made it, Jo whispered. Yes, Amy agreed, her voice filled with quiet determination, and we'll never forget. Meg placed a small wildflower on the grave, the same kind Amy had found in the camp. For you, Beth, she said softly, always for you. And as the sun set behind them, the sisters knew that they had not just survived, they had lived. They had fought for each other, loved each other, and held on to hope, even when it seemed impossible. They were free.